Hi, it's Buddy Bob, and I got my driver's cap on, and away we go. We're on the rock and roll Travelogue. Well, today we're off to Detroit, Michigan. Did you know that Detroit is a French word? Yes, it is. It means straight in French, S-T-R-A-I-T. The French occupied the area of Detroit many, many years ago, and that they noticed that the river, which is now the Detroit River, connected what is today Lake Huron and Lake Erie. So straight became the word, the French word. But we all know Detroit as the place where America's cars were once built. You remember the Imperial by Chrysler, the Mustang by Ford, and the granddaddy of them all, the Cadillac, built by General Motors. Did you know that the Cadillac was named for the man who discovered Detroit? The French explorer, de Cadillac. But enough of the history lesson. Let's move on because we've got lots to talk about as far as music is concerned. Calling in out around the world. Are you ready for a brand new beat? Well, that might have been in the back of the mind of the man that founded Motown Records in 1959. He was a man by the name of Berry Gordy Jr., and he got a loan of about $800 from his family, and he took some of the money from some of his earlier songwriting efforts to put into the founding of Motown Records. Now, one of those songs that he wrote was for a fellow boxer from Detroit by the name of Jackie Wilson, and that song was called Reet Petite. And by the way, Jackie Wilson was born in Highland Park, just outside of Detroit. 248 Cottage Grove was where he lived. The house no longer exists. Here's Jackie Wilson Lane today in Highland Park, Michigan. Oh, and by the way, speaking of early rock and roll, Bill Haley was the guy that really kicked it off with rock around the clock in the mid-50s. He was born in Highland Park as well, although he lived most of his life in the Philadelphia area. Well, let's get back to Berry Gordy Jr. He became one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in history by recruiting, developing dozens of fellow black artists and writers, mostly from Detroit in the very beginning. And he said he wanted to, quote, offer black culture to white consumers, end quote. And he certainly did that. And that may have helped to ease somewhat the racial tensions in the country that were predominant in the 1960s and 1970s. But he knew to appeal to the white audience, he had to have some sort of sophistication. So he decided to hire a woman by the name of Maxine Powell to teach the budding artists, many of whom had inner city backgrounds. She was there to teach them etiquette and also personal development. So she'd take the young women and she'd teach them how to do their hair and their makeup and their nails. She'd teach them how to walk and how to stand on stage. Well, in addition to Maxine, Berry Gordy hired a vaudevillian by the name of Charlie Atkins to teach the singers how to dance. And boy, could they dance. Never forget the Temptations. Great choreography. Berry Gordy started his business at 2648 West Grand Boulevard, and it soon became known as Hitsville, USA. He eventually bought several adjacent properties to the house because he needed all this extra space as the record label was growing. Well, here I am outside Hitsville, USA a couple of years ago. And right above the recording studio on the second floor was where Berry Gordy lived in the early days with his family. And if you take a tour of the Motown Museum, you go right through the living space. And it really is a lot of fun. Well, now that we've talked about Motown, I say let's go through some of the biggest Motown names. We'll start with probably the biggest. Her name was Diane, later Diana Ross, and she lived at 635 Belmont, shown here. The family moved on for several years to Birmingham, Alabama, before coming back to Detroit. Now, Diane had a neighbor down the street named Smokey Robinson. Yeah, he lived on Belmont as well. Smokey's early group was called the Matadors, and they eventually became the Miracles, and they were Motown's first group. Well, when Diane came back with her family to Detroit, they lived in the Brewster Douglas Projects. at 2700 West Antoine. And Diane spent her teen years here. Now, the projects no longer exist. You can see the Detroit skyline from the projects. She had some neighbors there, and she formed her first group, the Primettes, with 3 of those neighbors, 2 of whom followed her into the Supremes, Florence Ballard and Mary Wilson, all going on to become a member of the Supremes that later would be called Diana Ross and the Supremes. Well, Diana and the boss, Berry Gordy Jr., did have a long-term relationship, several years, and it produced 1 child. Speaking of Berry Gordy Jr., in the early years of his music career, he spent a lot of time at the 20 Grand Club. This is one of Detroit's most famous nightclubs. It was on 14th Street. No longer stands, just paved over today, and some weeds coming through the concrete. But nonetheless, this was the spot. And a young woman one night approached Berry Gordy at the 20 Grand Club, and she had a song that she'd written for Jackie Wilson. Apparently, Berry Gordy liked it because he ended up signing this young woman to a Motown contract. She was Mary Wells, and she had a succession of hits, the biggest of which was My Guy, written by Smokey Robinson. Mary Wells graduated from Northwestern High School. It's now a college prep school at 2200 West Grand Boulevard. It's close to the Motown Studios, by the way, so that's handy. She wasn't the only famous graduate from this school. Ray Parker Jr. also graduated from Northwestern. You might remember Ray Parker Jr. Remember the Ghostbusters? Who you gonna call in 1984? Previously, Ray had a band called Radio, and they gave us a song called You Can't Change That. Ray Parker Jr. was discovered by the Spinners at, you guessed it, the 20 Grand Club, where Ray Parker Jr. was in the house band. Martha Reeves sang at the 20 Grand Club. She was discovered there by a Motown executive. And Martha ended up answering telephones at the Motown offices. And one day a singer missed a recording session, and Martha stepped in. Well, Martha became, in just a matter of months, the lead singer of Martha and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street. Jimmy Mac, those were big hits among many others. Here's her home at 16170 LaSalle Avenue. She lived here from 1967 to 72 in Detroit. And I find this interesting. Martha Reeves served as a Detroit councilwoman from 2005 to 2009. This was some of Detroit's darkest days. Well, 2 other big Motown acts were Stevie Wonder, born Steveland Hardaway Judkins, in Saginaw, Michigan, a little bit north of Detroit. Stevie was born prematurely, and this led to the blindness from birth. Now, here's the monument to Stevie in Saginaw at 1314 North 5th Street, Saginaw, Michigan. At the age of 4, he and his mother moved to Detroit, and they lived in the home at 18074 Green Lawn. He became a soloist in the church choir at age 8, right around the corner from this home on Green Lawn. And then at age 11, he was discovered by one of the Miracles and brought to Motown. He signed a contract, and when he did, he was provided a tutor. You know, upon touring the Motown Museum, one of my favorite stories when visiting was a story about little Stevie Wonder, as he was known in the early days. There was a candy machine just outside the recording studio, and Berry Gordy insisted that dimes be left on the top of the candy machine so that the blind Stevie could pick up a dime anytime he wanted to, and then go to the lever 4 over from the left, pull it, and get his favorite candy bar, the Baby Ruth. And if you take the tour today, that same vending machine with the dimes on top, still there. David Ruffin was one of the greats at Motown. He was the lead singer of the Temptations. Who can forget My Girl? That was, of course, the answer song to My Guy, both of them written by Smokey Robinson. The city of Detroit is named Parkside Drive off the very famous McNichols Avenue as David Ruffin Avenue. Now, sadly, according to an article in the Michigan Chronicle, the place where David Ruffin lived was foreclosed, and his belongings just tossed in the street while he was in jail on tax evasion charges in Indiana. He had a problem with drugs. This led to a contentious relationship with the Temptations and also cut short his life. But he ended up leaving the Temptations in 1968. He was succeeded by Dennis Edwards, who led the next iteration of the group into a more psychedelic sound, because psychedelic was the big thing in the late 60s. Temptations came out with Cloud 9 and Psychedelic Shack, just to name a couple. Later on, Eddie Kendricks would become the lead singer before pursuing a solo career of his own. And he had a song that went to number one in 1974, Keep On Truckin'. This is a younger Buddy Bob, over 50 years ago, backstage at the Cleveland Public Auditorium with Eddie Kendricks. I must say that not only did I meet Eddie Kendricks there, I met one of the football greats. I still consider this man to be the greatest running back of all time, Jim Brown of the Cleveland Browns. And I've always been slim, even more so 50 years ago. And when I shook Jim Brown's hand, I swear he picked me up off the ground. He was that strong. I've met him a couple of times, and he was always wonderful to me. Well, no discussion of Motown artists is complete without mentioning the Four Tops. The big baritone voice of Levi Stubbs. He and his fellow bandmate Duke Fakir went to Pershing High School in Detroit, named after General John J. Pershing, served as the commander of the U.S. forces in World War II. The soldiers in that war were known as Doughboys, and that's the name of the mascot at Pershing High School in Detroit. Top's biggest hits, I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch in 1965, and a year later, Reach Out, I'll Be There. Well, a transplant from Memphis lived her early years in Detroit. Her father was C.L. Franklin, a very prominent pastor, and he came to be the pastor of the New Bethel Baptist Church. They renamed the street by the church C.L. Franklin Boulevard, 8340 C.L. Franklin Boulevard. And young Aretha sang in the choir here. Sadly, her funeral was held here in 2018. When we visit Memphis later on, we'll go see her birthplace and talk a lot more about Aretha Franklin. Although she lived in Detroit, she did not record for Motown. Another Southern transplant that did record for Motown was Gladys Knight with her brother and cousins, known as the Pips. Her first hit, 1967, I Heard It Through the Grapevine. And a year later, the great Marvin Gaye covered this song, became one of Motown's biggest classics. Well, this is the home that Gladys Knight lived in Detroit. She was at 16860 LaSalle. I was right down the street from where Martha Reeves lived. In her native Atlanta, the city has renamed a part of downtown Atlanta Gladys Knight Highway. And when we get to Hotlanta, we'll talk a lot more about Gladys Knight. So, before we go on this edition of Rock and Roll Travelogue, we've got to recount the artists that we saw today that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They are Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, and separately the Miracles, Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Temptations, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and the Spinners. Well, we'll see you next time on Rock and Roll Travelogue. I'm Buddy Bob. Until then, good heart and stout luck.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.